we're really entering the sci-fi realm of we now will have some robots walking around and they might be piloted by an AI model. And kind of like I think where crypto can play a massive role is in being able to have good governance structures around all of these systems. We can add verifiability, we can add integrity checking that the right things are being run, and we can add good policy checking along the way to make sure that the things that are being done according to broad, large-scale values or laws or rules about how these systems should operate.
Here we are with Juan Benet, founder of Protocol Labs, Filecoin, and IPFS. Juan, so great to have you back on the Defiant.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's just start by, for the few of my listeners who might not know what Filecoin is, if you can just, explain what...
So Filecoin is a decentralized storage network. The goal is to use crypto to create a permissionless, decentralized, robust foundation for humanity's information. It's effectively a decentralized physical infrastructure network that brings together people that provide storage and clients that want to hire that storage, using crypto to create a market and a set of incentive structures. And it's the world's largest decentralized storage network now, and it is kind of at scale able to compete with centralized cloud providers like Amazon and Google and others. And it offers, very low cost storage. We're able to get a price point that is even better than centralized cloud providers by being able to leverage cost reductions in the market, plus a whole range of features that don't exist in the centralized world, where you can add verifiability to storage or make it programmable with smart contracts or connect it to the kind of new wave of AI agents and so on. So there's a whole range of features that become possible when you create decentralized open networks, and Filecoin is a large-scale project to build like this kind of more free, more decentralized, more rights-protecting foundation for our infrastructure and our applications.
Awesome. Can you dive a bit deeper into why someone might choose to use Filecoin instead of cloud providers?
So usually with a new paradigm, you want to both give new feature sets and a cost reduction. So the new feature sets include things like being able to certify that the data is being stored in specific locations of the world or by many different parties so that you're not reliant on a single point of failure, and getting strong cryptographic verifiability that the data is there. Filecoin is the only large-scale storage network that offers that. Normally in the centralized cloud, you just have to take it on faith or trust that the companies are going to actually store your data. But with Filecoin, you get a strong cryptographic proof that happens every day that shows that your data is still around. And on top of that, you don't have to worry about any individual provider failing. Like the network can rebalance and has various other storage providers. And so it gives you a much more permissionless and free environment to really control your data. Then on top of that, you can connect your data to markets in a very crypto and DeFi oriented way, where you can create all kinds of systems and applications that wouldn't have been possible before. Like you can start doing things like storage futures, or connecting data streams to data marketplaces, or create data DAOs that kind of gather and collect data together and then sell the rights to use that data for something. So there's all kinds of applications and systems that are only really possible with blockchains. And then Filecoin gives you the ability to do that with the storage that you bring in.
I also love the point of censorship resistance, and I think for journalism, that's kind of what is really exciting to me. And we recently announced that the Defiant is storing all of our news archive with Filecoin, and for us, it's hopefully the Defiant doesn't get censored or shut down in the future. But I think that's a great, exciting use case for kind of information and news gatherers.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main reasons that brought me into the crypto and Web3 space is the ability to have information broadly distributed in the world. Like I personally really care about this problem. Usually in civilizations and societies, the moment that you have any significant kind of censorship, especially of journalism, when you need to be able to report on really critical stories, that's when problems really start in a society. And so I'm a very strong believer in freedom of speech and the ability to disseminate information and make sure that anybody who wants to access that knowledge is able to globally. And so I think the big shift in the 21st century versus the 20th century is that now with the internet, humans around the world are much more interconnected than they were previously. And they're connected to each other around the world much more than their like local nations. And so this kind of old world of nations controlling what their people can read or write or whatever, we really need to put that behind us and create a new environment where people can communicate freely. And so that kind of set of principles was a foundational set of values that influenced IPFS and Filecoin and a whole range of systems around this to really enable censorship resistance in a ton of ways. And one of the interesting things we've seen is these systems are getting used for really critical functions where important archives of data that other groups would like to destroy and not exist are being preserved through IPFS and through Filecoin and being distributed around the world. And kind of what you get out of this platform is that you get an information infrastructure where you can have applications and information sources that you can trust into the future, right? Like that they're not going to disappear suddenly on you.
So you said that Filecoin right now is the biggest decentralized storage network. Can you give a sense of how much is being stored and maybe by how many different entities or users?
Yeah, so it's getting into the close to 2 exabytes. The number of users is hard to count. There's probably in the hundreds of thousands of different organizations that have data sets of different types. The way that storage works in computing follows a kind of a power law distribution. So a few users use massive amounts of data, and then there's a long tail of users that use smaller amounts. Most applications end up producing very little data. So this is kind of in the gigabytes or terabytes. And so you can have thousands of applications with fairly small amounts of data. And then some users use huge amounts of volumes of data. So this might be large-scale scientific data sets. So the biggest users, like the biggest data sets that we have on the network come from these massive experiments that just collect an enormous amount of data. So these tend to be usually physics experiments where you take all of the traces of all of the outputs of all the instruments and you record everything. And so there's several universities and large-scale experiments in various large-scale labs that use Filecoin, and that's super cool. That's another use case that I really care about, like being able to accelerate science and enable scientists to be able to collaborate on data is like another important foundational piece. And then there's a ton of blockchains and networks that are now starting to store all of the data of their blockchains themselves. So both the trace of the chain and all of the data that the chain might refer to. And so that's another really big use case that's growing where whole chains are starting to use Filecoin to store their data. Because kind of like the blockchains tend to be fairly large in the amount of data, but when Filecoin is kind of orders of magnitude larger, and so you can support the distribution of a ton of this data.
Super interesting. Okay, so we've talked about different categories of users, universities doing scientific research, blockchains storing their own data, media organizations, and journalists. What other kind of big user category is using Filecoin?
So one other piece is there's a lot of kind of standard, there's usually this set of applications that provide broad cloud storage to end users. So for example, think of like a drive for files or collaborated documents and so on. Those kinds of applications can be used by tons of consumers or organizations. And there's a set of those applications on Filecoin where there's kind of like Dropbox style equivalents. And like Huddle is one example of a group like this where it's a network that does video call conferencing type of meetings. So think of it like Zoom or Google Meet or something like that. And then all of the recordings of those meetings end up stored on Filecoin. And that ends up being super advantageous because it's way cheaper than the centralized cloud providers. And so then Huddle is able to give this huge cost reduction to their end users. And that becomes a major adoption path because they're able to like get users from Zoom or Google because it's way cheaper to like store all the recordings with Huddle. And so there's a bunch of like consumer-oriented applications like that that go for individuals or small groups or companies and so on. And yeah, I don't think any of them are big enough yet to. A lot of these applications are not big enough yet to kind of challenge the main large Web 2 consumer apps. I think a lot of those adoption. Yeah, I don't exactly know what the adoption hurdles are. There might be around the UI or UX being too crypto-native sometimes or something like that. But yeah, those are like a cool category that we're pretty excited about.
You mentioned earlier that there are starting to be different AI-related use cases with Filecoins. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so with a kind of current paradigm of AI models, so you have this. So first off, you have the data that you're going to use to train a machine learning model. Then once you train that model, you have the actual model itself, which might be somewhere between hundreds of gigabytes to terabytes in size. And then you have the runtime when you are going to run that model. You're going to feed a set of invocations like prompts, and you're going to get outputs from that. And so all of the data associated with that workflow can be stored on Filecoin, and there's different groups focusing on different parts of the problem that are doing that. So for example, some groups are focused on doing strong tracking and provenance of the data streams that are used to train the model. So you can reason about what data is actually being used to train a particular model. So you can check whether something is in or out of the data set so that you don't end up with certain kinds of biases or with certain kind of important sensitive data that you don't want in the model. And then you want to be able to verifiably, that once you've trained the model, you want to be able to kind of freeze the state of that model and know that you're always going to be running that particular one. Or if you end up doing RLHF or something to align it to some other kind of like post-training type of changes, you can also freeze all of those. And so there are some other groups that are working on how do you kind of version control all of these different models, and how do you think about making sure that these invocations are exactly hitting that particular model and is not hitting something that has been changed under you, right? Today, in kind of like a centralized world, you don't know that the models are being changed under the hood. And there's been experiments that show that just slight tweaks to certain neurons in the model can cause wildly different outputs. There's like this great post from Anthropic showing how if you like clip one of the neurons that coded for the Golden Gate Bridge, suddenly all of the output that the model gives is obsessed with the Golden Gate Bridge. So like it turns every conversation into some like adoration of the Golden Gate Bridge. And in theory, that could be happening anywhere in the centralized landscape, and you couldn't tell, like you couldn't know that that's happening. And a lot of researchers have shown that you can kind of, even if you start with a base foundation model, you can post-train some of these to then start including these kind of biases or these kinds of like tendencies to go in one direction. And that's a pretty dangerous landscape if so many people become so dependent on AI systems and they're not exactly having their best interests at heart, and they're starting to optimize for some other goal that is not the user's goal. Like that's a kind of a dangerous landscape. So these groups in the centralized AI kind of execution environments want to be able to very strongly connect the model that the user really wants to be able to run to that execution and have strong verifiability. And then there's some other groups that are running large-scale training runs, like Prime Intellect and others, where like they're directly running massive-scale training runs to train new foundation models, and some other groups that are starting to use AI agents. So this is when, now that you have trained some models, you want to be able to run them on behalf of users, and beyond just the standard kind of like chat interface, you want to be able to start connecting models to complicated workflows. And start doing larger and larger complexity type of work. And there's a number of groups that are pursuing those use cases where they want to be able to kind of create these like large fleets or groups of agents that are interacting with each other and interacting with the world, whether it's via email or phone calls or joining in video calls. And so all of those outputs of the prompts to those models, or the output text or the output video and the output sound and so on, these groups are kind of like relying on Filecoin to store that in a decentralized and a verifiable way, which is pretty cool. It's early days though, so unclear who is really going to crack the adoption question here and be able to start competing with kind of the centralized cloud application providers. I'm also very excited about a different kind of use case that isn't yet in production, but people are currently talking about it and building it, which is to create the first blockchains where you have AI agents able to control their own destiny in a sense, like able to optimize. They have sort of their own accounts and their own balances, and they're able to optimize for their own goals. And this is kind of the first moment where artificially intelligent systems have something close to personhood of some sort, or a certain set of rights. And I expect this to become a much bigger deal this year or next year. It's still kind of early days, it's getting figured out. But that opens the door for a ton of possible upside, where suddenly you have now these agents able to interact with each other and interact with the world. And they behave kind of like corporations, where like they're an entity unto themselves. But now there's a bunch of possible risks and downsides here, because if you have these intelligent agents able to optimize in various ways, then the goals really matter, right? Like if you give an agent the goal of just maximizing money, and you don't give it any kind of parameters to guide, it could end up doing some really terrible stuff or manipulating people or whatever. And so we need to create infrastructure that is able to apply policy checking along the way, at kind of various steps, to make sure that the decision making is kind of lawful and things that we think are ethically sound. And so there's groups kind of working on this stuff right now. I don't exactly know when those things are going to launch, but I would expect that we should see kind of like a jurisdiction, or like a blockchain/jurisdiction, kind of creating like an environment for these kind of AI agents or AI corporations or AI kind of pseudo people almost, sometime in the next year or two, which is like a crazy world.
Sounds like science fiction,
Yeah.
like robots kind of like, going off and thinking for themselves.
Yep.
A bit scary. So yeah, like you said, important to have kind of guardrails around them.
Totally. It's definitely, we're finally getting to kind of the sci-fi future that has been talked about for over a century. And we're starting to uncover, machine intelligence that is as capable as human intelligence. The kind of next big problem that is kind of changing now is robotics, where it's one thing to have machine intelligence inside of a computer and in a data center. It's a whole other thing to now have robotic systems in the world embodied that can like go around and like do things. And so this might be whether, the form factor of like, the robot dog sort of thing, or a humanoid, or even larger sort of things. Robotics has had this huge bottleneck where the control problem of being able to move a body and interact with the world, like, being able to have a robot open a fridge and pick an egg and then like crack it just right and fry it, is like dramatically harder problem than composing a symphony or producing a movie or doing extremely complicated math problems. It turned out that like the things that humans are very capable of doing and are very basic and we normally don't associate with intelligence are actually where a huge amount of our brain power and our motor functions go into. And so that was a huge challenge. It is starting to get solved. And so now that that's happening, there's been this huge surge in production, and now there's a large number of companies pursuing this, both around the world, but especially China and the US. There's many companies now producing pretty sophisticated humanoid robots, expecting that the software problems are going to get solved over the next 2 to 5 years, and I think that's kind of right. Now, the question of how we solve that problem is tricky. Like, there's one piece which is, okay, practically, technically speaking, how do you actually produce these algorithms? And then second is like, okay, well, once you have these models, how are they governed and who gets to use them? And this is a major change into the status quo of the world, and it could be a very big destabilizer into how the world works. And so we have to, as a civilization, be very careful about which groups gain access to this kind of capability, because just in the same way that it can give you kind of automated factories or, can like automate a lot of jobs that are very dangerous for humans today, where there's a massive loss of life that is a huge problem. And there's a lot of upside to robotics. There could also be massive downsides where you suddenly have robotic armies, and so suddenly countries are more willing to go to war because maybe it's not people dying, it's just kind of robotics being robotic armies going after each other or whatever, or drone armies. And so it can be, these kinds of technological advances can be very destabilizing. And so we have to as we do this, figure out like what is like the right governance structure for these kinds of systems and this kind of intelligence. And it also then equips AI systems that may be starting to become kind of self-oriented and so on with the ability to have like now bodies to go and operate in the world. And so like we're really entering the sci-fi realm of we now will have some robots walking around and they might be piloted by an AI model. And so that could be as soon as 2 to 3 years, as late as 20 years. It's very difficult to predict some of these things, but it's very soon, right? Like this is not 100 years out. This is like very close now. And kind of like I think where crypto can play a massive role is in being able to have good governance structures around all of these systems. We can add verifiability, we can add integrity checking that the right things are being run, and we can add good policy checking along the way to make sure that the things that are being done according to broad, large-scale values or laws or rules about how these systems should operate. And the cool thing about crypto is that you can apply all of this policy checking at every level. Like you could be as deep as in between every invocation of an LLM, you could check that like the decision making is according to the rules. And so it's a much more direct and strong way of kind of governing these systems than maybe even like the Asimov laws of robotics kind of propose. And so I think it's suddenly crypto has a very important role to play in kind of steering the world into the good outcomes. And so yeah, I think it's very promising and exciting.
It does sound really promising, kind of scary, and
Totally.
hopefully crypto can help kind of steer this technology in a direction that is helping humans and just diminish that risk. I'd like to change gears a little bit and talk about Crecimiento, which you and Protocol Labs have been deeply involved in. Can you explain a bit of what Crecimiento is and what's happening now with the movement?
So Crecimiento was this really exciting movement to try and upgrade Argentina's economy using crypto financial rails. So Argentina's economy has been through like lots of ups and downs and swings for many, many decades since the beginning of the 20th century. Argentina started at the top of the world. It was one of the top 10 countries by GDP. And a bunch of like financial mismanagement kind of eroded the infrastructure of the country. And so today, Argentina has a position where it has incredibly deep talent. Like just people are super brilliant, super creative. There's just a kind of like an overrepresentation of Argentinians in great companies and great products and so on. So it's fantastic. But the local economy isn't strong enough for society. Before recently it's had massive inflation, and maybe the inflation problem is coming down finally. But it's been there's still like the economy is still not anywhere close where it could be, just given the level of talent and production that the Argentinian people have. And so the goal is to say, okay, well, crypto has built all these financial rails over the last 10, 15 years. We've built this parallel financial system to the original traditional finance world. We have currencies, we have loan systems, we have markets, we have equivalents of bank accounts, we have bonds, we have like every single thing that a normal economy could want or need. And so you can take all of these new magical technologies that we've built and then upgrade all of the economic infrastructure of Argentina using crypto. And so Crecimiento is a movement to kind of to accomplish that by helping build a set of startups that can tackle each of those problems, right? So usually these kinds of changes in the world happen because there's a particular group or organization that is able to produce some product that creates this new technology and is able to diffuse it into the market effectively. And that usually requires some kind of startup environment where one or a few startups tackle that problem and they solve all the hard challenges around how do you actually build this technology, how do you put it into a good product, how do you get adoption, what is the right way to use it. Think of like things like Airbnb or like the sharing economy, ride sharing things like that possibility now exists because there was a whole range of groups that built those products. And so for each of these kind of like large economic frictions in Argentina, we can build specific products associated with that. And kind of what the movement is trying to do is to take this particular moment where there is both an enormous amount of bottoms-up adoption of crypto and kind of top-down government support to try and catalyze a lot of the building of these startups kind of upgrade the rails. And the bottoms-up adoption in Argentina is amazing. It's one of the countries with the highest number, percentage of crypto users, and it comes from the massive inflation, right? So the massive inflation the country had in the last decade or two created this mistrust in the national currency, and a very practical reality that if you didn't move your assets into some other currency, they were going to be completely inflated away. I think a lot of the world was very frustrated with like 15% inflation right after COVID, and this was a massive priority for tons of countries, and Argentina has had over 100 to 150% inflation in a single year. It's like dramatically larger, and it's very difficult to kind of relate to that kind of problem if you haven't seen it or lived it. But it just kind of changes how a lot of people think. It's difficult to save. You can't. You can't save. You have to kind of spend what you have, or try to create some kind of like currency producing asset or like business or something like that. It's just very, very difficult on people in general. And so getting to a point where like there isn't that crazy level of inflation is important. But because of the history, and maybe some groups can fix that, but because of the history, there usually tends to be some kind of back and forth here. And so the hope is that by building new economic primitives with crypto, you can end up with this decentralized, more resistant to kind of manipulation, kind of financial environment, where people are able to, like the Argentinian people are able to control the economy much more strongly, and prevent certain kinds of mismanagement that were possible before. So I sort of see it as like Argentina could be the first nation in the world that kind of adopts crypto primitives for the underlying infrastructure to run the economy, and that could be like a massive, massive shift. And this sounded kind of like maybe crazy a year ago, but now in a very short time, a lot of people have gotten pretty excited about this vision, are working on this, are building some of those startups and products, working with government to figure out what is the landscape, how do they pass the right regulations. There's an opportunity of creating an economic zone, like a digital economic zone for these kinds of startups to be able to experiment with things. So it's like a pretty promising movement. And the movement is organized with a set of pop-up cities that happen during the year called Aleph, where that brings together thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in Buenos Aires to talk about all these problems, work on things, demo the latest range of things, help connect entrepreneurs to investors or users or potential hires. And that's been kind of, the focus of the movement so far.
Nice. So to wrap up, I'd love kind of the next steps or next milestones that you're looking at for both Crecimiento and Filecoin.
Yeah, so the next milestones for Crecimiento are, Aleph is another pop-up city is happening starting right now in March, and it'll run all through March. And then there'll be another one later in the year, hopefully connected to DevConnect. So I don't think it's announced yet, or it's not certain yet, but a lot of people think that DevConnect will probably be in Argentina this year. And so there'll be a large pop-up around that. And we hope that would be a big moment to make Argentina like the crypto capital in the world. And broadly, it's just trying to support a lot of the startups that are building. And then for Filecoin, kind of like the major focus for the network is getting product market fit with a bunch of these use cases and continuing to improve the product experience. There's just an enormous amount to do around just continuing to polish the UX for all kinds of users. I think like maybe major milestones might be around, there's a whole range of L2s appearing now on Filecoin, and so supporting the growth of those L2s.
Nice. Thank you so much, Juan. As always, great talking to you and hearing your vision on this whole range of topics: AI, robotics, decentralized storage, all fascinating. So really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was great.